Have you guys noticed that absolutely everything is getting more political? It's like politics have went into every single part of our lives. Isn't that true? And the more political things get, the more the government takes over, the harder things are, aren't they? The more frustrating things are going on, the more complicated things are going on, the more political things get, the more we're seeing the institutions around us start to stumble and fail. And that is what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about a specific institution and how we're supposed to look at this because it seems to be teetering and failing. Now, some of you guys already know what I'm going to talk about because 2 weeks ago, Dave started talking about it and said we're going to give an entire message on it in 2 weeks, and this is that week. We're going to be talking today about God's mandate for education. Now, before we talk about God's mandate for education, we need to first talk about God's mandate. How does God mandate things? What is his authority and how is it given? And where do we find these different institutions and what levels of God-given authority? So I'm going to take the first little bit of this message. I promise I won't go too hard and long into this to talk about God's given authority. You guys ready to jump into that? Okay, so basically God gives 4 basic institutions authority. He gives the individual, he gives it to the family, he gives it to the church, and he gives it to the civil government. God has all authority, and this is how he exercises his authority. And each one of these 4 institutions, God gives responsibility. And when that institution carries its responsibility and stays within its God-given lanes of responsibility, he releases power and grace to be effective. Is that true? So the problem comes when one of those spheres of authority does not take its God-given responsibility and run with it. The other problem that we have come up is when one of those spheres of authority goes outside of its boundaries and trespasses in the responsibility given to a different sphere of authority. You guys with me still, right? I want to focus in this morning on 2 of those spheres of authority. I want to talk about the civil government. It's important for us to know that God's plan was the civil government. I want to look at the civil government and I want to look at the church. And the reason I want to look at those 2 is because really the family is just the smallest expression of the church, and the church is the greatest expression of the family. They're married, they're 2 components of the same thing. So I want to, just for the sake of time, really hone in on both of these things, and I want to evaluate them because we need to understand how God's authority works and how he mandates things before we decide our ideas on God's mandate for education. Does that sound good? So here's the deal. I am going to look at authority right now in a really simple way. Mark Hoffman, in his book On Earth as It Is in Heaven, brings up this word picture that I believe gives us a really easy way to understand God-given authority. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start with God's authority to the civil government. We're going to find it in this scripture, Romans 13, 3-4. God brings up a word picture here. Okay, it says this. It says, for rulers, remember we're talking about civil government, for rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise for the same. For it is a minister of God. It's God ordained. It's a minister of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the what? For it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. So here we are, we're given a word picture for the civil government, and that is the picture of the sword. Now, what is a sword a symbol for? It's a symbol for coercive power. God has given the civil government a purpose, and that purpose is to forcibly restrain evil and therefore protect good. Is that right? And when the government goes in its lane and stays in its lane, it does an incredibly great job. Think about our military right now. You guys, we've got one of the greatest militaries, not just in the nation, or not just in the world, but in all of history. When the government stays in its lane, it does a good job. Think about our firemen and our policemen. They're looked at as heroes, aren't they? When you leave this building, is anybody afraid? No, because the government has done a good job through its firemen and its police. And what about the safety? We're one of the safest nations in all of the world through our building codes and our fire codes. And is anybody worried about the roof coming down on them? No, maybe someone's worried about lightning because they said, I'm afraid if I go to church, lightning's going to strike me. That's different. One of my neighbors, I was like, dude, come to church with me. This is not my nose. Come to church, you got to come. He's like, dude, if I go to church, lightning's going to strike me. And I was like, I'll bring a fire extinguisher. Just come to church. It's when the civil government goes out of its God-given assignment of responsibility that we start to see the breakdown. Is that true? Now, let's take the sword. Let's leave the sword right here. Let's leave the civil government right here. Let's talk about the church now. Because we want everything to be in the lane that God gives the power and the grace to be effective. What is the lane for the church? What is the church's God-given authority? Well, like the civil government, Jesus gives it a word picture. And like the sword, how it gives definition and purpose to the civil government, this symbol will give definition and purpose to the church. So we're going to read it right now. It's in Matthew 16, verses 18 through 19, it says this, I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. We're talking about the church here. And the gates of Hades will not overpower it. Someone say amen right there. Because that's a big deal, man. The gates of Hades got nothing on us. And I will give you the what? Ooh, there it is, the word picture. The keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Here we see that the Lord gives us a symbol. It's the keys. He does not give the church the sword, and he does not give the civil government the keys. They're separate. They're supposed to be separate areas of authority, but what are the keys? What do keys do? Keys unlock things, right? They open doors, they open hearts, they open minds, they release God's supernatural power. They unlock the riches of the kingdom of God here on earth. And when the church stays inside of that lane, it's incredibly effective, isn't it? At change, the keys of change. I mean, hundreds of millions of lives have been transformed by the moving of the church, right? Families have been restored. Hope has been given. People have been set free from things that have held them slaves for decades and decades by the keys of change. God's power is released in humanity through the church. The sword represents the power of man. The keys represent the limitless power of God. And when the institutions follow God's lead, staying in their lanes, they are blessed and they are effective and they have the grace to go further. The problem happens when we step out of our lanes, out of our boundaries, and trespass on the responsibilities given to another. I want to look at one of these things right now. I want to just to look at the welfare system. Let me ask you this question. Who do you think, the sword or the keys, the coercive sword or the keys of change, what of those organizations or institutions do you believe that God gave the authority to take care of the needy? Think about it. Pretty easy, isn't it? Because not only through scripture do we know, but just when you look at the workings of the world right now, you can see which one's blessed and which one isn't. When you look at the church, you can see that church-ran charities have been highly effective at helping the needy. Isn't that true? They take the needy, they give the needy the need, and then they help the needy step out of that area of need, and so often now become the givers. That's what we see. Now, when you look at the civil government's welfare system, we don't necessarily see that happen, do we? The civil government's welfare system, it more creates dependency than it does create change because they do not have the keys of change. Now, I want to take the rest of this message and I want to look at it at this idea of authority, of mandate in the realm of education. Now, before we go into education, it would not be fair of me to not show you pictures of all of our staff in their yearbooks when they were in education. You guys want to see these? I always bring you presents. Come on now. I'm going to show you these, and this is the funny part. They don't even know that I was doing this. I went around their wives and got all these pictures. So, all right, let's get the first one up here. This is Neil Hoffman. This is when I was a junior, and I'm going to tell you something about my hair. Listen, my hair it's always just wanted to get away from my face. It just shot up like an afro, and all of my friends called me Pineapple Head. Still hurts. Let's go to the next one. Michael Van Meter. I know, what happened to Mike? So handsome. All right, let's go to the next one. This is Dave Hoffman. Why can't this guy be our pastor, you know? All right, this next one, you guys ready to see Mark Hoffman? All right, Mark Hoffman. What? Listen, my mom sent me this, and she's like, here's a picture of your dad, and I'm like, this is not who's my dad, Mom? I can't see him in here. I'm like, am I adopted, actually? Because I can't get there. It's Mark Hoffman. All right, prepare. Let's get the next one up there. Can you see who this is? This is our high school pastor, John Ulloa. And his mom assured me that those horns were real. Look at that. Listen, if you're in here and you're in high school and you want this picture, just come talk to me after. I'll send it to you, okay? All right, let's look at the next one. Danny Esslinger, counseling pastor. Doesn't he look like he should be on Saved by the Bell? His wife's like, who's that other girl right there? I want to know. All right, let's go to the next one. Oh, yeah. You guys know who this is? Kevin Miller. Listen, I look at this picture, I'm like, you can't call that handsome. You have to call it pretty, right? You have to call it pretty. All right, let's go to the next one. Oh, yeah, this guy's on the Andy Griffith Show. This is Don Bastrom. You guys, look at Don. Okay, I did save the best for last. You guys need to be careful real quick. If you have any kids, shield their eyes. You guys want to see Hank Dima Husky? Let's do it. Hank! Hank looks like some character in the Harry Potter series, doesn't he? Who would have thought that Hank had the most hair of all of us on staff? Hank Dimasi. Okay, education, you guys. I want to look at education. What is God's mandate for education in the realm of authority? Where has he placed education? We're going to start off with one passage that is one of the most important passages in the Bible. Now, who gets to decide what's the most important passage in the Bible? I'm going to tell you right now, Jesus. Because back in Mark 12, Jesus, when asked what's the greatest commandment, he quotes the passage we're about to read. I'm not calling it the most important. He himself does. In fact, it's the Shema. It's the first prayer an Israelite child would learn. To this day, it is still the last confession that an Orthodox Jew says on its deathbed. And this passage is chocked full with understanding God's mandate for education. How many of you guys are like, okay, shut up, Neil, just what is it already? Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 through 7 is known as the Shema. It says this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. These words, say these words. I want you to remember that. These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up, and when you're at Starbucks, and when you're at blah, 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 all these places. This is a great, incredible starting point to understand God's call for education. First thing we see here is this: that you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your might, and you should teach your kids to do the same. We have a sacred duty. There's no higher priority. We have a sacred duty to love God with all of our hearts, and an equally sacred duty to teach that to our kids. Isn't that true? And then we have this other thing he says, and you shall teach these words diligently to your sons. What are these words? When they go through this passage, what were the words that he was talking about? Well, they were the words that Moses was teaching them in Deuteronomy, but all of the Torah, all of the first 5 books of the Bible, the laws of Moses. This was the Israelites' form of education, because the Torah was God's explanation for all of life. In the Torah is God's explanation on how to live life, on how life is supposed to operate, on how to get values and morals. This right here was their curriculum, saying, fathers, teach all of these things to your kids. And he says this, I like this in there. He says, and these truths need to be so deeply on your heart that you can teach them to your kids. The most sacred duty to the Israelites was to teach their kids. Judaism became a religion whose greatest heroes were teachers, and whose greatest passions were raising up that next generation. Think of all of the ancient civilizations. The Mesopotamians built ziggurats, the Egyptians built pyramids, the Greeks built the Parthenon, the Romans built the Colosseums, and Jews built schools. They knew something. They knew how much God cared about education. They understood how God focused on. They understood if they were going to change the generations, if they were going to keep their views on God, they had to educate their young. Wang Zhang, a Chinese philosopher, put it this way. He said, if you plant for a year, plant rice. If you plant for a decade, plant a tree. If you plant for 100 years, educate a child. The Jews understood this idea. If you want to look forward for 1 year, then really you don't have to do a lot. But if you look for 100 years, the most important thing that you can do is educate a child. God cares very much about the education of our children, and he gave the authority to do so to the parents. This is the realm, the line. This is his form of authority. And as a bigger set of the family, he gives it to the parents and the church. We're looking at where is God's mandate? Is it to our public systems? Is it to our Christian systems? Let's look at Ephesians 6:4. It says this, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. This is another passage chock full of education, because the word discipline is not like the word that we use it for. We a lot of time use the word as discipline as using punishment to correct disobedience. But the word discipline here, it doesn't work in our English vocabulary. It's the word paideia, and it means the whole training and education of a child. It relates to the cultivation of the mind and the cultivation of the morals. That's what this word means. What this is saying is, do not provoke your kids to anger, but bring them up in the full education and instruction of the Lord. We need to think deeply about how health and science and biology and all of these subjects, we need to think deeply and understand them in the light of God. You guys know that education was never meant to be understood outside of the light of God. You guys get that? From the very beginning, education is not meant to be spiritually neutral. What is biology? Biology is learning about how God made life, how he authored life. What is physics? Physics is how God turned the system of the world and how it's supposed to work. What is English? It's understanding this communication that God gave us and how we can use it to glorify him. Nothing inside of our academic system is meant to be spiritually neutral. And education is not simply teaching subjects, is it? It's teaching kids how to think. It's teaching them how to reason. It's giving them values, and it's giving them a comprehensive worldview in which they are going to take for the rest of their life. And if we don't teach our children these Christian worldviews, then what happens? Well, in that same verse, it tells us what happens, and we see it. At first, it's hard to see. I'm going to read that again. Ephesians 6:4 says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the education and instruction of the Lord." What happens when we don't give our kids this Christian worldview? What happens? It says right there, we provoke them to anger. This is interesting because when we do not teach them a Christian worldview, they start to learn the secular worldview. Isn't that the truth? When they go to our public school systems, they are learning a secular worldview. And it doesn't take long until they realize that it doesn't work. And when they run into this problem, when the worldview that they've accepted doesn't work, they start becoming empty and conflicted and confused and frustrated, and fear and anger start to set in. And the secular worldview, it makes angry people and angry children. And why? Why, when we look out across our youth today, do we find them self-destructive? Why do we look and see that it's so hard for them to make life choices? Why is anxiety a part of our little kids' life? Why do we see kids, young and all the way up through high school, start turning to alcohol and drugs? What is it? I think it's clear. They've been taught and educated and brought up in a worldview that is a lie. Here's a problem. I already kind of broke into it a little bit before. Here's a problem. We have this idea that academic education should be spiritually neutral. I've already talked a little bit about it. That it should be spiritually neutral, that they should just learn biology as biology is. I'm going to tell you right now, our kids are never meant to understand these subjects outside of the way that God designed them, authored them, called them, and made them to work. They're never meant to do that. But there's another problem. Another problem is many of us believe that the public school system educates our kids in this religiously neutral idea of education, where they can go and they can get just purely academics, and then they can go to our churches on Sunday and they can get the spiritual side of education. Can I tell you something right now? Our public school systems are not spiritually neutral. We need to realize that. We need to know that. In fact, I want to give you a couple of things that are being taught inside of our public school system. Radicalized sex education is being taught in our public school system. They promote homosexuality and they promote transgenderism. They encourage the people that come out as these things as heroes. They confuse our own kids about their gender. Listen, I don't know what the public school that you went to when you were young, but it's a different public school today. They don't even know what their gender is. And they force teachers to deal with curriculum that teaches fake history, calculated to make our own kids look negatively on their heritage, on their biblical principles that they've been raised up on the very ideals of the Bible. This is what happens when when one of the institutions of authority steps out of its boundaries and trespasses on another. Things start to break down. Reminds me of what Jesus said. When you guys remember, they come up to Jesus and they say, should we pay the tax? You guys remember this? And Jesus says, whose image is on this coin? You guys remember this? And they respond, they say, Caesar's. Caesar did something to get his image on that coin. So he says, render to Caesar that which is Caesar's. But he doesn't stop. He finishes it. He says, and then render to God that which is God's. I believe this talks about education. Caesar did something to get his image on that coin. Render that to Caesar. God did something to get his image on something. What takes God's image? Our kids. Our kids have God's image. He says, render to God that which is God. Listen, if we keep sending our kids to Rome, we have to stop being confused of why they're becoming Romans. You understand? And I'm going to say something right now, and I don't mean it to be hard or mean. I just mean it to be biblical. It is time that we start getting our kids out of the public school system. It is time. It is time that we make sure our kids are raised up with a Christian worldview. Now, you might feel like many do, you can't take all of the lights out of the public school system. You may have said that. We can't take all of our Christians out because they're the lights. And I like this idea. And it makes sense on some levels. But the problem is this. At these formative years of our kids' lives, they're a lot more like sponges than they are lights. They're not ready to be lights. They're not there. The Bible says, do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good moral. And we've seen that happen so many times. There are countless stories of the parents in here that have seen it happen with their own kids. And these kids with good morals and ideals go into the system and they come out empty and confused and lost. You know where the lights are in our schools? The lights are the teachers. Teachers, if you're a public school teacher, you are the light inside of that school. If we've got board members here on for the school boards. Yeah, you are the light. You guys are the light there. You should see yourselves as missionaries on that field. In fact, all of us should pray for you as missionaries, that your influence would grow. But our kids are sponges. We need to get them out. Now, let me tell you something right now. We need to realize this. This is not a parent problem. This is a church problem. This is not a parent problem. This is our problem. For too long, the church has neglected its duty to open up schools so that kids can get Christian education. For too long, the church at whole has just looked at it as a parent's issue. Can I tell you right now that us on staff, your pastors on staff are looking at this in a new light. And we see it as a church problem, and we want to team up with all of you parents to make sure that we can get your kids Christian worldview education. That's what we're doing. We have a bigger commitment and investment in it. Mark and Dave and myself have sat in the office for long periods of time trying to figure out how can this be our problem? What can we do? We don't want the parents to feel like they're all alone. You have the support of your church and the help of your church. And as we were talking about this, we came up with 3 reasons of why Christians don't put their kids into Christian schools. And I want to talk to those 3 reasons right now. The first reason is because Christian schools just don't have enough space. I mean, how many of you guys have been on a waiting list to get your kids in Christian schools? Can I tell you something really neat that we did about 6 weeks ago? Because it's hard. There's just not enough room. 6 weeks ago, we called a bunch of the pastors in the East County area. And we said, we're going to have a conference at our church. And we're going to show you guys how you can start a school for your church. 12 churches showed up saying, we need to do something. Isn't that amazing? 12 churches said, we need to start bridging this gap. This isn't our parents' problem. This is our problem. 5 of those 12 churches are already working on their way through to start this. We may have 5 new Christian schools starting next year. Isn't that great? And that's going to take the pressure off. Right now, starting February 1st, it's the 16th of January. February 1st, we are giving private open enrollment to Foothills families. You want to get your kids into school? Sign up fast. Get in on the beginning. It's private. It's not open to everyone. It's open to you. Make sure you get them in. Here's the other thing. What's the biggest reason why? The second reason. What's the biggest reason why we don't send kids to Christian schools? Yeah, money, right? It is expensive to send kids to a Christian school. Again, it's not a parent problem. This is a church problem. So here's what we've decided. The staff, the board, all of us have decided. We're going to make a little course change with the ship of this church because we want to support you. You need to be able to rely on us here. And we are going to trim financial fat where we can, and we are going to start funneling money, more money than we ever have funneled into our scholarship programs. We are going to funnel it in right now so that there's nothing worse than money being the reason why one of our kids cannot get a Christian worldview. You guys understand that? So we are going to put money in to where our mouth is. Sound good? Parents, though, let me just talk to you. I'm not saying nothing's your job, because really, first and foremost, this does fall on you. And even though we're going to open up financial ways that we can make it happen, you need to open up financial ways that it can happen. You need to be faithful and see what God will do with your faith. If money's been the problem, I'm telling you right now, no longer let money be the problem, because where you cannot finish it, we want to figure a way out to supplement. But first it falls on you. There's this family here at Foothills, and they had 2 of their kids in. I just want to tell you what happens when you put faith to things. They had 2 kids in our schools, in Christian school, and the wife got pregnant and ended up having a baby and could no longer work. So they were trying to figure out, how are we possibly going to keep our kids in Christian schools on one income? It's a lot harder. So they just started praying and asking God to do something. They had faith enough to ask him. And as time got by, they started getting closer and closer to the date where something had to change. And nothing changed, and they're getting right up to the wire, and they're about to take their kids out because there's no choice, and their neighbor comes over to their house. Their neighbor that they don't know, by the way, and says, listen, you've got good kids. I've seen them in the neighborhood. My situations have changed at my work, and I am no longer able to be here when my kid gets on the bus and gets off the bus. Could I pay you to help be with my kid for the time before he gets off the bus and the time after he gets off the bus? How many of you guys know it was the right amount that they were going to need to be able to keep their kids in private school? God cares about our Christian education to our kids. And when we run inside the line that he has put us in, power starts to move through us. But listen, again, this is a church thing, so let me talk to the business people in this room. Maybe you're sitting in here and you're thinking, yeah, we got to get these kids out. Then jump on board with us in helping them. Maybe it's time that as business people, we start putting money for these kids up. Maybe you need to start seeing these kids in our church as the mission. Maybe you can sponsor a kid or half a kid or a quarter of a kid. What can you do? Grandparents. I don't know what I said was funny. I mean, a quarter of a price for a kid. Grandparents, I want to talk to you. Your grandkids are your legacy. What if What if your kids could get 75% of the way there to sending their kids to school, but they were short 25%? And all it was going to take was 25% of your money to get your kids out of the public school system, out of the secular worldview, and into a Christian worldview. Listen, this is a whole church problem, and we are all the solution. Lastly, I want to talk about the third thing that we saw, the third problem. So the first problem was room. The second problem was money. The third problem is that homeschooling is not for everyone. And the schools that this church have are schools that go Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but are homeschooled Monday, Friday. And you may be a family that has both parents working, and that can't work for you. We're going to put more effort, and we are going to create bigger, enlarge our Monday, Friday programs at our school, meaning our optional Monday, Friday programs, which means this, that your kids go to school Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday like normal, but you can sign up for a Monday, Friday program so that while you're at work, the schedule would look the same as if they were in the regular school system, and that doesn't need to be a deterrence anymore. Yeah. We're going to make this happen together. Now, I also want to talk to the families that it's impossible. Because the truth is, there is impossibilities in getting our kids out of the public school system. We've been wrapped up in this for so long that some of us really are stuck. And Rome wasn't built in a day. It's a process to make the way over. And for each one of our families, the process is a little bit different. And everybody has their hardships, special needs families. Listen, I get it. It's hard because the private and Christian schools, we don't have the resources that you need yet. We don't have the funding. Well, I want to get there. And you may feel stuck or even split families. Families whose the other spouse says, absolutely not, we will not send them to Christian schools. You're stuck. It's impossible for you to make the move. And there's other reasons for other families that feel just as stuck. And there's nothing you can do about it. I want to tell you this. There may be nothing you can do to get them out of the public school system, but there is a lot that we as the church can help you supplement the worldview that they're getting in the public school. There's a lot of resources and information that we can give you. Here's one of them right now. It's at our visitor table, our connections table out there. We want to give you this. We ran out of this almost twice now. They did print more. We want to give you this. This lets you know what your rights are as a Christian in the public school system. Take this and give it to your teachers that are Christians so that the teachers know what the rights are. But not just giving you information, we want to help supplement what your kids are being taught Monday through Friday inside of the public school system. For you, there should be nothing that gets in the way of getting your kids to their youth groups. We need to supplement what they're being taught. Do you understand? No matter what, there should be nothing that gets them in the way of their small groups during the week. The camps that we have, these need to be the food that you are feeding your kids, that you are giving to them, because we need to create an appetite for the eternal, not for the secular. And we want to stand, let's get the band up here. I forgot to call them up. We want to stand in here with you guys as well, those of you guys that are stuck. And lastly, I want to say one other thing that I think is that I really want to invite every single one of you that are thinking about education. Whether you're ready to make the switch now, whether you don't know how to make the switch, and you just don't know what your options are, because there's more options than just Foothill School or public school. There's lots of options to get your kids a Christian worldview taught in the truths of the Lord. Saturday, 6 days from today, Saturday, from 9 to noon. In what room? What room, Linda? In the youth auditorium from 9 to noon, we are going to have an education conference in which we are going to give you 5 different options that you all have, all the way from full-time Christian school to full-time homeschool, and all the options in the middle, so that you can be informed on how to get the kids out of this secular worldview that is being taught. The radical sex education, the gender confusion, all that kind of stuff. And I want to let you know we stand with you and we see this as our problem. And we're here. Let's stand up right now.